Empty fields, empty heart. The cornstalks stood brittle and brown, skeletal fingers clawing at a sky the color of tarnished silver. Thomas ran a calloused hand over the withered leaves, the dry rustling a mournful song in the desolate field. It hadn't rained properly in weeks. Sarah would have known what to do. She always did. He remembered her, straw hat perched on her head, examining the soil with a practiced eye, a smile playing on her lips as she predicted the yield. Now only dust swirled around his boots. The farmhouse loomed in the distance, a silent sentinel against the encroaching dusk. Inside, the air hung heavy and still. He ate his stew alone at the long oak table, the silence amplifying the clinking of his spoon against the bowl. It tasted of ash. He pushed the bowl away, appetite gone. Upstairs, he stood before her photograph on the dresser. Sarah, young and vibrant, her eyes full of laughter. He traced the outline of her face with a trembling finger. The glass was cold beneath his touch. "I miss you, Sarah," he whispered, the words swallowed by the emptiness of the room. The silence pressed in on him, a suffocating blanket. He was adrift, a lonely ship lost at sea with no land in sight. He felt like the fields, barren and cracked, reflecting the wasteland in his own heart. He turned away from the photograph, unable to bear the weight of her memory. The house creaked around him, a symphony of solitude. A telegram and a poster. The telegram arrived with the midday sun. A yellow rectangle thrust into Thomas's calloused hand by a breathless boy. He recognized the stark lettering of the telegraph office and felt a familiar prickle of dread. News from back east was rarely good. He ripped it open, the paper crackling like dried leaves. Bride arriving Harmony Creek Thursday, stop Anna, Schmidt awaiting pickup stop. Harmony Creek was the next town over, a good 2-hour ride by horse. Thomas frowned. He didn't know any Schmidts, and he certainly hadn't ordered a bride. Probably a mistake. He tossed the telegram onto the dusty workbench, the matter forgotten as he returned to mending a broken harness. Later, kneading nails, he rode into town. The general store buzzed with the usual Saturday crowd. As he waited his turn, a splash of color caught his eye, a poster tacked to the wall beside the penny candy. A woman's faded photograph sat above bold letters, "Find your future. Mail-order brides available. Inquire within." Thomas stared, a knot forming in his stomach. He hadn't paid much attention to such things, dismissing them as foolishness. But now, the telegram and the poster seemed to coalesce, forming an unsettling picture. "Something catch your eye, Thomas?" Mr. Henderson, the store owner, leaned over the counter, his eyes twinkling. "That mail-order bride program. Heard tell it's helping a lot of lonely folks." Thomas grunted, picking up his nails. "Just passing the time." He paid, the coins heavy in his palm. As he turned to leave, Mr. Henderson's words hung in the air, a seed of doubt planted in the dry soil of his routine. "Harmony Creek, you say? That's quite a trip for a young woman alone." Abandoned at the station. The train hissed to a stop, spitting steam like an angry dragon. Thomas Abernathy stepped onto the gravel platform, the midday sun beating down on his weathered face. He adjusted his spectacles, scanning the small crowd for Mr. Peterson, the station master, a man whose belly strained the buttons of his uniform. He found him near a pile of mismatched luggage, his face creased with concern. Beside him sat a woman, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. A mountain of a woman, Thomas thought, his initial surprise quickly giving way to a familiar discomfort he hadn't expected. "This." Mr. Abernathy, Peterson greeted him, his voice low. "Terrible business, this is. Agnes Plumtree, meet Thomas Abernathy." Agnes looked up, her face blotchy and tear-streaked. Her eyes, though red, were a surprising shade of violet. A small, embroidered handkerchief was clutched in her hand. "She offered a week, hello?" Peterson cleared his throat. "Seems her intended." Well, he took one look and hopped right back on the train. Said she wasn't what he expected. He gestured towards the luggage. "Left her high and dry." Peterson shook his head, the gesture conveying all the injustice of the situation. Said she was too stout. Thomas shifted uncomfortably, his gaze drawn to Agnes's downcast face. He knew what it was to be judged, to be found wanting. He hadn't expected this complication, but he couldn't just leave her. Could he? A leap of faith. "I dreamed of gingham curtains," Agnes whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. She plucked at a loose thread on her traveling cloak. "And a garden overflowing with roses. Somewhere no one knew my proportions." She glanced down at her ample form, a wave of shame coloring her cheeks. "Somewhere I could just be." "Agnes." Thomas shifted, the rough wood of the bench digging into his spine. He'd come seeking solitude, not a confession. Yet her vulnerability resonated within him, echoing the hollow ache in his own heart. Gingham curtains, roses, a life free from judgment. He hadn't dared to dream in years. The station bell clanged, announcing the delayed arrival of the westward train. Agnes flinched, then straightened her shoulders, a fragile defiance in her eyes. I suppose I should wire my aunt. Tell her. The words caught in her throat. He saw it then, not just the despair, but the flicker of hope struggling to stay alight. A reckless impulse, born of loneliness and a sudden, fierce protectiveness, seized him. What did he have to lose? Another evening spent staring at the four walls of his silent farmhouse? He reached for her hand, his own calloused palm engulfing her smaller, softer one. Agnes, he began, his voice rough and used to such declarations. Don't wire your aunt. Marry me. The words hung in the air, thick and improbable. Agnes stared at him, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with disbelief. The approaching train hissed and screeched, a discordant symphony accompanying his impulsive offer. The world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for her answer. A train station wedding. Agnes stared, a strangled sound escaping her lips. Marry you? But you don't even know me. The enormity of her situation, compounded by this outlandish proposal, threatened to overwhelm her. She swayed slightly, and Thomas steadied her. His eyes, a surprising shade of warm brown, held hers. I know you're heartbroken and stranded. I know Mr. Peterson thinks the world of you. And I know, he added, a gentle smile tugging at his lips, that you have the most captivating shade of auburn hair I've ever seen. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Sometimes, Agnes, you just know. Hesitation warred with a desperate hope within her. Could she truly consider such a thing? Looking into his kind face, seeing genuine concern etched there, something shifted. A flicker of trust, fragile but present, ignited within her. All right, she whispered, the word barely audible above the hiss of the arriving train. All right, I will marry you. Mr. Peterson beamed, clapping Thomas on the back. Knew you had it in you, lad. Now we need a reverend. He scratched his chin thoughtfully. Bellwether. He's usually at the Golden Barrel Inn, blessin' the travelers. The Golden Barrel was a short walk away, smelling strongly of hops and wood smoke. Reverend Bellwether, a jovial man with a booming laugh and a stomach that strained against his waistcoat, readily agreed. Back at the station, under the flickering gaslight, Reverend Bellwether spoke of love, commitment, and the unexpected paths life often took. Agnes, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers Mr. Peterson had hastily gathered, listened intently. Thomas's hand, surprisingly warm and steady, held hers. The train whistle blew in the distance, a mournful sound that seemed to bless their hasty union. As they exchanged simple vows, Agnes felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet conviction that the farmhouse and whispers. The rutted track gave way to a yard choked with weeds, leading to a farmhouse that sagged like a tired hound. Paint peeled from the clapboard in strips, revealing gray, weathered wood beneath. Agnes swallowed, a lump forming in her throat. This was it. Home. Or, at least, a place to live. Thomas cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the sudden silence. It ain't much to look at, I know, he said, his gaze fixed on a loose shutter banging against the wall. But it's solid. And the land's good. Inside, the air hung thick with dust and the scent of wood smoke. Furniture, draped in faded cloths, sat like ghostly sentinels. Agnes perched on the edge of a horsehair sofa, feeling as out of place as a silk rose in a field of wheat. Thomas busied himself stoking the fire in the hearth, his movements deliberate, almost hesitant. He was as uncomfortable as she. Gossip, like dust motes in a sunbeam, swirled through the town. Mrs. Higgins at the general store pursed her lips. Abernathy? Married? To her? The butcher, wiping his hands on his apron, nodded sagely. He needed a wife, and she needed a home. Still, quite the pair? Whispers followed Agnes like shadows whenever she ventured into town, whispers that stung more than the wind that whipped across the open fields. They saw an odd couple, a mismatched pair born of desperation. They didn't see the quiet kindness in Thomas's eyes or the flicker of hope, however fragile, that bloomed within Agnes's chest. The approaching storm. The wind picked up, a mournful howl that snaked through the corn stalks, making them dance in a frantic, unsettling ballet. The sky, moments ago a gentle blue, had bruised to a menacing purple, heavy with unshed rain. Thomas squinted, the metallic tang of ozone already thick in the air. Storm's comin', he announced, more to himself than Agnes, who was still picking listlessly at a loose thread on her worn valise. He didn't wait for a response. He was already striding towards the barn, his boots kicking up dust devils. Agnes, secure the chickens. And see if you can bring in the laundry. He trusted her to do as she was told, but he had no time to check, already wrestling with the heavy barn doors. The first fat raindrops began to splatter on the parched earth as he secured the last latch. He found Agnes struggling with a flapping sheet, her face flushed with exertion. "Here," he said, taking the sheet from her. "Head inside. It'll be a downpour any minute." "But the animals," she protested, her voice barely audible above the rising wind. "They'll be fine," Thomas said, though he wasn't so sure himself. He saw the stubborn set of her jaw, the glint in her eye that had nothing to do with tears. "All right," he conceded, "help me with the hay bales. We need to weight down the tarps over the west field." He expected her to balk, but she surprised him. She heaved a bale, nearly as big as herself, and carried it, staggering only slightly, towards the waiting tarp. He watched her, a flicker of something akin to admiration sparking within him. This woman, deemed too heavy, too plain, was proving to be anything but weak. The storm broke in full fury then, a blinding sheet of rain and a deafening roar of thunder. They worked together, soaked to quilts and kindness. Dawn broke gray and bruised. Thomas emerged from the farmhouse, the door protesting with a groan, and surveyed the damage. The wind had been a brutal sculptor overnight. The cornstalks lay flattened, a green sea turned brown and broken. The barn roof sported a new, unwelcome skylight. He ran a hand through his already disheveled hair. Agnes came to stand beside him, her face pale but resolute. "We'll fix it, Thomas," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "It'll take time, but we will." He managed a weak smile. "Easy to say, Agnes. We haven't the money for half this." Agnes looked at the house, then back at the ruined fields. "I can sew." Thomas frowned. "Sew? Quilts?" she said, a spark of excitement flickering in her eyes. "I have scraps, remnants, enough to make warm quilts. We can sell them at the market." The market was a riot of color and noise. Agnes, behind a hastily constructed table draped with her handiwork, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Would anyone buy them? The quilts were practical, warm, and made with care, but were they pretty enough? A woman with shrewd eyes examined a patchwork quilt featuring vibrant blues and yellows. She ran a calloused hand over the stitching. "How much?" she asked, her voice rough but not unkind. By the end of the day, only 2 quilts remained. Agnes counted the coins, her fingers trembling. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a start. A hopeful seed planted in the ravaged earth. Thomas, who had been repairing fences all day, arrived to help pack up. He saw the near-empty table and the tired but triumphant look on Agnes's face. He put his arm around her. "See? I told you," he said, but his voice was thick with emotion. "You. Love blooms anew." The memory of Agnes's tears at the station still stung, but now Thomas felt a different ache. It wasn't pity, it was something warmer, more profound. He'd been so focused on finding someone to fill the void left by Martha, someone pretty and agreeable, that he'd almost missed the vibrant spirit shining through Agnes's sorrow. Her kindness towards him, a stranger in her moment of crisis, her quiet strength as she faced ridicule, these were the things that truly mattered. He loved her resilience, the way she hummed while mending fences, the surprising wit that surfaced when she thought no one was listening. He found her in the barn, tending to a newborn calf. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in the wood, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and the gentle curve of her cheek. Taking a deep breath, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Agnes," he began, "I haven't been honest. Not with you, not with myself. I came here looking for a wife, a replacement. But what I found, it's so much more. I love you, Agnes. Not just for your help, but for who you are." Agnes froze, her hands still on the calf's wet fur. She looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. The weeks that followed were a blur of shared labor and whispered hopes. The farm, once a symbol of his grief, slowly came back to life under their combined efforts. They planted new crops, repaired the dilapidated house, and built a life brick by brick, filled with laughter and quiet moments of contentment. The whispers of the town faded, replaced by the comforting rhythm of their shared existence. He realized then that love didn't need to be a grand, sweeping gesture. It was the quiet tending of a shared garden, a silent understanding that bloomed in the heart, unexpected and beautiful.